Wendy Teagarden and I climbed the steps to the wooden door under a tattered green and white striped awning. Above the awning, a neon sign, El Pingüino, in white script, cast a cold, inert light into the dark street. An outline of a penguin, complete with top hat, spats, and holding a martini, glowed beside the letters. Taped to the door was a hand-lettered sign scrawled with a broad tip marker, closed tonight at 8. I held the door open for Wendy, and we entered a short, dingy hallway. A petite yet well-toned Latina, wearing mirrored wraparound sunglasses, a black leather halter-top dress, and matching open-toed pumps, stood before the next door. Her brunette hair, pulled into a bun, contributed to her sleek appearance. She peeked over the tops of her sunglasses and revealed briefly her tapetum lucidum. She smiled and nodded, indicating that we could proceed. Wendy pushed open a battered metal door, heavily scratched and mangy, with hand-sized blotches where the latest coat of paint had flaked loose. We walked into the lounge. A karaoke singer was mangling "I Got a Line on You." A row of dim amber lights above the bar illuminated the room. Most of the frayed vinyl stools around the heavy wooden bar were empty. Cigarette smoke curled from ashtrays and mingled with the luminescent ribbon of silvery haze that snaked above the patrons' heads. A conglomeration of smells, hairspray, drugstore cologne, perspiration, spilled drinks, and cigarette ash, told me that I'd probably have to soak in bleach to get the funk out of my skin. Wendy waved to the bushy-haired man behind the bar. "Hi, Mel." He lifted his head and nodded. The mass of his gray hair wove into bushy sideburns that sprouted from his jaw. Thick muscles and a substantial belly filled out his shirt. Mel's eyes, like most of those that flashed toward us from the clientele, glowed from the reflection of his tapetum lucidum. A small microwave on the bar counter pinged. Mel grabbed a pot holder and pulled a 450-milliliter bag of blood from the microwave. He snipped a corner of the bag and poured steaming red liquid over a bowl of nachos already drenched in melted cheese. A waitress in a pink tube top and black stretch pants squashed her cigarette into an ashtray on the bar and placed the nachos and 2 bottles of Fat Tire Ale on her tray. She took the tray and circled past us. The incandescence of her vampire eyes matched the luster of the fake rhinestone in her belly ring. Wendy led me to a booth between the bar and the stage. I sat next to her, careful not to peel the duct tape from the vinyl seat. I was glad that Wendy had asked me out for an evening of entertainment. My investigation was at an impasse. I'd learned that such interludes can allow my subconscious to work on the next step, or at least keep me pleasantly distracted until the next break happens. For now, my worries hovered in the distance. I took out my contacts. Around me, everybody shimmered from their auras, the vampires in orange, the few humans in red, and Wendy in green. Against the wall to our right, 2 men with orange auras stood on a stage, or rather, on a slightly raised platform covered with worn and stained carpet. The large mirror behind them was chipped and cracked along the edges. The mirror showed a room with a few humans, though vampires were also present. One of the vampires operated the karaoke machine, which occupied the top of one table, while the other vampire, bald, with a white turtleneck and black suit, held a cordless microphone and sang. He glanced at the words scrolling across the television screen hanging above him. Long fangs protruded past his upper lip and into the gape of his smiling mouth. Mercifully, the song ended. The vampire hummed the last bars of the tune, became silent, and bowed. A group at the far end of the room clapped and hooted. The vampire acted as if he had treated us to a musical masterpiece, though the best part of his performance was when he shut up at the end. "The acoustics back there must be better," I whispered to Wendy, "because from up here I've heard better notes from a wood chipper." The waitress stopped by our booth. "The drinks include rabbit blood. For an extra $3, we can make it human. Type O positive is the special." "I'll take a Dos Equis," Wendy said. "Hold the blood. Carta Blanca for me," I added, with a rabbit blood chaser. The waitress nodded and left. The karaoke crew dismantled their machine before anyone else could wreck our Western musical heritage. Faces in the lounge turned toward a commotion in the back. 6 vampires in black mariachi outfits appeared from the rear of the lounge. They carried guitars, cornets, and violins at the ready, as if the instruments were rifles. Lights glittered off the spangles sewn to their jackets and trouser seams, and the sequins stitched along the brim of their sombreros. The mariachis got on stage and did a sound check. The leader of the group adjusted the microphone stand and introduced himself and his colleagues as Nahuali. The name of sadistic Aztec clerics who had presided over human sacrifice was now the moniker of this cantina festivity. The group started with the song Mariachi Loco, which got the crowd moving with laughter and shouts of ahua. The song ended and the lights went dark. A single spotlight beamed toward the back of the lounge and illuminated a lone voluptuous figure surrounded by an orange aura. This vampire was so covered with emerald sequins that she looked wrapped in green foil. The spotlight followed her progress through the lounge. The shank of a leg flashed in and out of the slit in her tight dress. Her bosom jiggled like firm pudding. An aromatic banner of perfume trailed her. The lead mariachi introduced her as our own chupacabra, the demon who drank goat's blood. Smiling seductively, as if her lacquered lips alone could make us all swoon into orgasm, she grasped the microphone. The group started to play Selena's Beady Beady Bomb Bomb. The chupacabra singer bounced her hips in tempo to the music and began to wail. Couples, combinations of human and undead, took to the floor and danced. The rest of us had to crowd close to converse over the musical din. All the auras modulated into a fuzz of glowing static, a measure of our collective good mood. The waitress brought our drinks, the beer in tall glasses and the blood in a tall porcelain cup. Wendy and I clinked our glasses and sipped. We sat contentedly and absorbed the homey ambiance. Vampires shared cigarettes, joked, and slapped each other on the shoulder. At the tables before us, chalices rolled their sleeves and cut their forearms with razors or penknives. They let blood drip into the martini and highball glasses of their vampire masters. The chalices' eyes fluttered and their red auras spread out from them as they swam in the pleasure of their sacrifice. "Wendy Teagarden," I said. She turned to look at me, her expression warm and full of anticipation. "Don't suppose that's your original name?" I asked. "Oh, I've had lots of names through the years. Figured you'd been around a while. You don't date older women?" Wendy looked about 28, though I'm sure she was several hundred. Supernatural immortals age well. She wove her arm into mine and pulled it under the table. Her hand slipped past my wrist until our fingers clasped. With her face fixed on the singer, Wendy nudged against me, crossed her legs, and let her ankle drag across my shin. Since I've been a vampire, I never needed a woman to express affection for me. When I had the urge, a flash of tapetum lucidum was enough to get into a vagina. Lust and eroticism, these were tools to manipulate humans. What need did the damned undead have for romance? Wendy's interest kindled a forgotten desire within me. A wave of excitement coursed through my body. My aura sizzled. I tried to calm my aura before Wendy noticed the effect she had on me. Wendy brought her right hand across and stroked my upper arm. My aura sizzled more intently, fueled by anticipation. She snuggled closer. My aura radiated as if I were plugged into an electric socket. A human woman bumped against our table. "Have you seen Ziggy?" I turned to her and a male companion beside our booth. Because of their red auras, I recognized them as the chalices serving Siegfried von Dreck, the old vampire I'd met at the Hollow Fang party. They wore similar white shirts, wrinkled, and the sleeve cuffs unbuttoned. Their glassy eyes cast worried looks at me. Chalices can become slavishly devoted to their vampires and often pine after them like junkies for their dealer. The man's eyes teared. He was supposed to meet us here. His voice cracked. "We haven't seen him since Sunday." This distraction caused my aura to fade to a safe, even glow. Wendy relaxed her grasp of my arm and fingers. "Have you tried calling him?" The woman reached into the hip pocket of her pants and pulled out a cell phone. "Constantly. There's no answer." I resented the intrusion from these addle-brained chalices. "How about going by his house?" The woman closed her eyes and raked trembling fingers through her hair. She opened her mouth and it took a moment for her reply to croak through her lips. "Ziggy won't let us visit without an invitation." Probably so that these two airheads wouldn't disturb his interviewing other chalices. "Do this for me," I said. "Go by Ziggy's place. If he doesn't like it, tell him to take it up with me." The woman hugged her companion and kissed his cheek. She panned her head toward the mariachis, as if suddenly aware of the music. It would be like ignoring a freight train, and said slowly, "We'll do that." "Now would be a good time," Wendy replied. The woman took the man by the hand and led him out the door. "They're as stupid as they are cute," Wendy said. "Maybe they've given up so much blood that it's affected their IQ." "I doubt their SAT scores were very high to begin with," I replied. Ziggy didn't keep them around for stimulating conversation. Then again, for an old pervert, he is being a bit too indifferent toward his pets. Maybe he needs time to recuperate. Ziggy recuperate? Gossip is he buys Viagra by the carton. Wendy clasped my arm again and squeezed. "And how much Viagra do you need?" "I've never had cause to use it." "Why? Lack of opportunity?" "You're talking to a young vampire, a fountain of concupiscence." "Is that what you call it?" "Call what?" I asked. "When your aura went to full burner a few minutes ago, didn't think I'd notice?" I didn't want her to know the effect she had on me, so I said, "It wasn't you, it was the singer. The lady chupacabra." Wendy released my arm. "Oh." Her aura cooled to a pale yellow green. Even a supernatural divinity felt the sting of rejection. My cup of blood was still warm enough to release a wisp of vapor. I chugged it and washed my mouth with a hearty swallow of beer. If this was about sex, I'd pull Wendy close and nibble on her neck before working my way to her mouth as I fingered her. But Wendy was more than a mortal woman. She was a dryad with supernatural powers at least equal to my own. And I was certain she was smarter than me. But the real complication was that I liked her and felt energized by her attention the way I'd been before my life as a vampire. With every passing minute, the moat of silence between Wendy and myself grew wider and deeper. The mariachis churned through their repertoire of ballads. Every song about romantic betrayal and loss raked bitter words over me. What happened to the simple days when vampires merely prowled the night and sucked on necks? Or did the tales leave out all the messy details in the retelling? Messy details like this one before me. I felt pressed into an emotional corner, queasy with the rush of uncomfortable feelings. My cell phone started to vibrate. Caller ID gave me Bob Carcano's number. I pressed the receiver to my ear and answered. Bob replied, "I'm right outside. Come see me." His clipped tone relayed his distress. I grasped Wendy's hand. "Let's go. The change in venue might refresh our conversation." Bob waited under the awning. His aura burned bright orange and flashed in rhythm to the agitated beat of his pulse. As soon as he saw us, he started down the stairs and across the sidewalk. "Felix, let's take your car. I'm too upset to drive." "Where are we going?" Bob held up his cell phone. "Ziggy's Chalice is called. He's been murdered." I sped north on Colorado Boulevard in my Dodge Polara. The wind drummed across the convertible top. Wendy sat beside me while Bob gave directions from the back seat. Considering it was a Tuesday night, I didn't have much problem running red lights and weaving through traffic. Bob and I wore sunglasses, with just enough tint to hide our eyes while still allowing the use of vampire night vision. Around us, human auras glowed in their cars and on the sidewalks. "What did the Chalices tell you?" I asked. Those idiots didn't say much, mainly blubbered about how scared they were going into Ziggy's house, and then they found him dead. Bob craned his neck to read the street signs. "We're getting close. Could it be Vanatori de Vampire?" Wendy asked. Bob rubbed a meaty hand across his face. "Don't know yet. I'd hate to be right about that. Ziggy liked skimming the margins of human society, so he could have been murdered by a hoodlum or a speed freak." Wendy looked back at Bob. "Or another vampire." "Yes, that's a possibility," Bob replied. "Ziggy had lots of enemies, both human and undead." Wendy shifted her head to check out the passenger's side mirror. "We've got company." Headlights closed rapidly on my rear bumper. I tensed my grip on the steering wheel and readied my foot to stomp on the accelerator. Who followed? Humans? Vampires? Auras being psychic energy, they didn't reflect through mirrors. A glance over my shoulder revealed 3 orange auras inside the car. With the recent mention of Ziggy's many enemies, the unannounced arrival of vampires alarmed me. Bob twisted around to look out the back window when his cell phone chirped. Ironically enough, the chime was a funeral dirge. He answered the call, speaking quickly, then snapped his cell phone closed. "It's my friend Andre and his pals. They'll be going the back way to Ziggy's house." I turned east into an older, fashionable neighborhood. Ranch-style houses of brick and stone stood behind manicured lawns and neatly arranged shrubs. The car behind us careened up the next street. Wendy rolled her window down. The night chill blasted into the car. She wrinkled her nose. Phew! All I smell is arsenic trioxide and sodium nitrate. Americans don't garden, they wage chemical warfare on their plants. Zipping up her jacket, she tipped her head out the window and made a faint hooting sound. Bob pulled off his sunglasses. I took his cue and removed mine. The fuzzy auras of cats and small rodents slinking beneath the hedges sharpened. I spied two bright red auras clumped together behind a thick bush along the wall of a house. A pair of very excited humans. Ziggy's killers waiting in ambush? On the left, I said. 2 humans. Bob scrambled to his left window. He chuckled. Relax. It's a couple of kids fooling around. One of them's getting a blowjob. Homework for a sex ed class, I asked. Hope she gets an A, Wendy added. They're both boys, Bob replied. I doubt they'll ask for extra credit. Something darted in front of the windshield. I tapped the brakes. The flying streak vanished as rapidly as it had appeared. What the hell was that? What was what? Bob gripped the top of my seat and searched past my shoulder. I don't know. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was hallucinating. Wendy rolled her window back up. It's safe. No one's waiting for us. How do you know? A little bird just told me. Bob pointed to a house at the right where a cottonwood tree grew in the center of the lawn. The curtains were drawn across an illuminated picture window. A small, battered sedan sat beside the curb. That's the Chalice's car. Pull up behind it. I parked my Dodge close to the rear bumper of the little Toyota. Stickers of rock bands and slogans were plastered across the trunk lid and rear window. Guano apes, Devotchka. Depression is anger without enthusiasm. A clear conscience is usually the sign of a bad memory. And my favorite, oral sex won't cause brain freeze. Wendy jerked her door open and started for the house. We followed her across the lawn and past the cottonwood tree. Bob and I surveyed the area as we approached the front door. How come you're so sure it's clear? I asked. A horned owl fluttered to a tree branch above us. The owl hooted and flew off. Wendy hooted back and remarked, like I said, a little bird told me. Got any more tricks, Dr. Dolittle? Lots, but the night's young yet. Bob strode ahead and his silhouette crossed before the picture window. He placed his hands on the wooden front door. Bob stood quiet for a moment, then declared, I'm not detecting anything dangerous. Nudging Bob aside, Wendy grasped the brass door handle and clicked the thumb latch. How many times do I have to say that the coast is clear? Whoever did this is long gone. How would the owl know? I asked. That's what the cat told the owl. Wendy pointed to the small red aura hiding underneath a car across the street. She pushed the door open, leading us into a foyer. Most of the interior lights were on. Plush carpets in beige accented the restrained furnishings of pale oak and earth-toned leather. I figured Ziggy to be heavy into industrial fetish, I said. This place looks like a Marriott hotel. For a Kinko's manager, he lived well, Wendy noted. Where'd he get the money? Besides satisfying his carnal appetites, Bob replied. Ziggy polished his skills as a scam artist, hence his many enemies. Don't act surprised. Vampires aren't known for their moral scruples. We followed a soft sobbing drifting from the back of the house. The closer we approached the sobbing, the more my vampire senses tingled. My fangs grew. I pulled Wendy's petite frame behind me. She elbowed me in the ribs and took a place next to me. We stepped into a sunken den. The male Chalice lay curled in the fetal position. Shivering, he sobbed quietly and stared up at the woman Chalice, who knelt beside a prostrate figure. Tears dripped from both Chalice's reddened eyes. Wrinkled white shirts clung to their sweaty bodies. Despite Wendy's assurances that we were safe, the hairs on my skin stood in fear. I walked forward a step to examine the body. Ziggy's decapitated corpse lay supine, surrounded by the flakes of his dried vampire blood. What had been his sternum was a black pit marked by a ragged hole in his shirt. The gruesome stump of his neck looked like a rolled slice of bacon. His head rested against the leg of an end table. A lock of long white hair flopped over his eyes, which stared emptily up at the ceiling. His mouth gaped open, as if he'd been killed in mid-howl. Our collective gaze lifted to a darkly spattered pattern of holes punched into the wall. I said, Looks like someone pressed a shotgun to our friend Ziggy and gave him both barrels. Wendy opened a pocket knife and knelt beside the body. She poked into the wound and dug out a pellet of buckshot the size of a pinky fingernail. Polishing the pellet on her sleeve, she revealed a shiny ball. Sterling silver. Someone's taking their vampire killing seriously. You've noticed? I thought the decapitation was a good clue. Orange auras shone through the blinds covering the French doors along the back wall. It's Andre, Bob said. The doorknob clicked, one door swung open. A vampire wearing a green velvet sport coat and denim jeans entered, crawling upside down like a spider across the header above the door. Bracelets on his wrists reflected the den lights. His ponytail dangled to the floor. He crept across the ceiling and scowled suspiciously at us and Ziggy's corpse. Two more vampires came through the door, walking onto the carpet in normal fashion. The woman was the petite brunette we'd seen earlier at the El Pingüino lounge. A padded shoulder leather motorcycle jacket covered her torso, giving her a muscular, intimidating appearance. The man was older and thin. His close-cropped gray hair started from a well-defined widow's peak. Bob welcomed him. Andre, sorry I couldn't tell you more over the phone. We just got here ourselves. They made introductions among us all. Andre spoke in a heavy accent. Carmen, the vampire woman, unzipped her jacket and displayed the cleavage within her leather halter top. Dan Skypony, the vampire on the ceiling, let his cowboy boots swing down, and he hung for an instant by his fingertips before dropping to the floor. He paced around the female chalice and caressed her head as he licked his lips. Bob picked up Ziggy's head and pushed the upper lip back to reveal holes in the jaw where the incisors had been pried out. Venatori de vampire. This was a ritual killing, and they've taken his fangs as proof. Andre stroked his face in a gesture I'd describe as nervous. His eyes flitted from side to side as if looking for something the rest of us hadn't seen. You okay, Andre? Bob asked. You look scared, I thought. I'm fine, Andre blurted. He coughed to mask a glint of embarrassment. Vampires aren't supposed to show fear. Dan stood over the body. I can't figure how this happened. Ziggy hasn't lived this long by being careless. I'm not so sure, I interrupted. Remember how he scoffed when you first brought up the question of the vampire hunters? I think maybe he did get careless. Or maybe it was someone trying to make it look like vampire hunters, Wendy said. What do we know about these Venatori? Carmen asked. Very little, unfortunately, Bob answered. So what do we do? Skypony asked. Bob took Ziggy's head and cradled it under his arm like a basketball. Learn more. Stay alert. Carmen pointed to the corpse as if it were a heap of misplaced trash. What about that? The usual means of disposal, solar immolation. Bob studied the layout of the den. A large bay window faced east across an open yard. This place is perfect, he told the chalices. Find a tarp or a shower curtain. Bob dragged his shoe through the flaked vampire blood on the carpet and a vacuum cleaner. The female chalice returned with a shower curtain, a plastic one of yellow and blue stripes. The male chalice found a Hoover upright in the closet. We pulled Ziggy's corpse to the middle of the curtain, which we then dragged against the wall. Bob had the female chalice strip the body. He ordered the male chalice to vacuum the dried blood and clean the wall. We'll spackle and paint the holes later. Carmen took Ziggy's Tag Heuer watch and wallet. Wendy bundled the clothes and shoved them into a plastic garbage bag. Using the shower curtain, we dragged the corpse to the middle of the room and arranged the body so the feet pointed toward the bay window. Bob set the head upright by the neck. As a final touch, Wendy bent over and adjusted the scrotum and penis. Wouldn't want Ziggy to be uncomfortable. Carmen and Skypony shared a pack of cigarettes and lit up. She tapped her toe and exhaled a jet of smoke. So we have to wait here till morning. Patience. When morning comes, we'll divide the spoils. Bob tipped his head toward the chalices. You'll enjoy it. Bob and Andre rummaged in the kitchen, collecting food for an impromptu wake. Bob cooked steaks, hash browns, and corn on the cob. Like every modern vampire, Ziggy kept jars of animal blood in his refrigerator. Skypony and Carmen went to the bar on the opposite side of the den. One of them found the stereo and played jazz. Carmen made drinks. Andre took a paring knife and sliced the arm of the female chalice and ordered her go to every one of us and offer blood as if she were dispensing gravy. I declined the offer. We lounged in the den, ate dinner, and sipped drinks. Andre chuckled as he recited vampire anecdotes in his bad English, much of which Bob had to translate. Wendy and I shared Manhattans. With the rye whiskey seeping into our bloodstreams, she and I set our plates aside on the coffee table. She kicked off her shoes, and before I could protest, climbed into my lap and rested her head on my shoulder. Wendy's body settled against mine. She didn't weigh much, 100 pounds maybe. Her green aura softened and pulsated in tempo to the low purr coming from her throat. Where our auras overlapped, my orange and her green took on an iridescent shine, something I'd never witnessed. Then again, I'd never had a dryad sit on my lap. Wendy didn't ask to impose on me. She simply assumed that I wanted her close, which I did. Problem was, I didn't want to admit my desire to her or myself. Wendy wove her fingers into mine and snuggled against my neck. My aura grew brighter, and other things stirred. Sky Pony tapped Carmen on the knee and then pointed to me. Was I the first vampire ever to feel embarrassment? We were fearsome killers, rapacious as wolves, and yet at this moment, I, Felix the vampire, felt as awkward as a schoolboy at a dance. Wendy whispered into my ear, "I can slide off you. Just say the word." I didn't. After a moment, she brushed her lips against my cheek. "I knew you wouldn't." Bob turned on the TV by the bar and switched to the Weather Channel. Sunrise was to be 6:27. The other vampires searched Ziggy's room and brought out a tray of Dermablend and sunblock, which we gooped on. At 6 a.m., we put on our sunglasses. Carmen opened the blinds on the bay window. We vampires tucked ourselves into the shadows of the den. The dawn sky lightened, turning from black to purple and now to blue. The rays of the sun peeked over the roof of the house on the other side of the yard. The sunbeam splashed against the wall. Minute by minute, the beam widened and scrolled down toward Ziggy. When the sunbeam touched Ziggy's head, his skin wrinkled and smoldered. The stench of burning, rancid meat smacked us like a wave. The sun's rays lapped down Ziggy's body like a ravenous tongue of fire. His flesh turned black. Smoke curled against the ceiling. The smoke detector went off. Centuries of death held at bay reclaimed Ziggy's corpse. His charred body collapsed into a pile of ash. Carmen closed the blinds. We took off our sunglasses. Sky Pony crawled up the wall and yanked out the smoke detector's battery to silence the wail. The chalices started to cry again. "How do we explain Ziggy's disappearance?" I asked. Bob replied, "The Iranium will arrange it that he died of natural causes while vacationing in Panama. We'll appoint someone to take care of his estate. Now to clean this mess." We lifted the shower curtain by the corners and carefully poured the ash into a garbage bag. "What would happen if we added water?" Carmen joked. "Would we get instant vampire?" "Yuck," Sky Pony said. "I don't even like instant coffee." A garbage bag filled with ash and another bag stuffed with his clothes. This was all that was left of Ziggy. "You vampires aren't very sentimental," Wendy said. "I doubt Hallmark makes a card for this," Bob replied. Carmen stepped behind the female chalice. "Now that we've finished our janitorial duties, time for the vampire initiation. As reward for your loyalty, welcome to the ranks of the damned." Carmen's eyes glowed in bloodlust. She grasped the female chalice's shirt collar with both hands and yanked. The chalice staggered to remain on her feet. Carmen wrestled with the chalice until the shirt and bra tore free. The chalice stood before us, bare-breasted. Sweat trickled down her pale face. Her eyes stared out into nothingness. Sky Pony grabbed the male chalice by the hair, ripped off his shirt, and forced him to kneel beside the female. "We've lost one vampire and gained two." Sky Pony slapped the male chalice. "This is what each of you wants? Immortality as one of us?" Both chalices whispered a frightened duet. "Yes." Their auras turned an incandescent red like heated metal. All the vampires bared their fangs and circled the chalices. The vampires stripped naked and tossed their clothes behind them. Their orange auras merged and lit the darkened room with the fearsome intensity of a bonfire burning out of control. They would attack without hypnosis so that the screams of the chalices would fuel their undead ardor. Carmen and Bob each took an arm of the female chalice and sank their fangs into opposite sides of her neck. The chalice squirmed, now a pale form of jiggly flesh, and shrieked in agony, for they bit without secreting anesthetic enzymes. Blood streamed down between her breasts. Sky Pony and Andre wrestled the male chalice to ground. Giving in to panic, he fought them. They fended off his blows and laughed as they relished this opportunity to prolong the kill. Their bare feet tracked blood across the carpet. So much for our tidiness. So long as I never drank human blood, I would be immune to this descent into the lurid recesses of our feral nature. I've spilled enough human blood as a soldier. Wendy looked me over. Why are you still dressed? I have my reasons. Bob's loud snarl surged above the screams of the tormented chalices. He called me. Felix, join us. Blood smeared the stubble of his beard and dotted the hairs on his chest. You know I can't, Bob, I said. And after tonight, what do we do about the vampire hunters? Bob's blazing eyes narrowed. The Venatori de Vampire will get what's coming to them. I hadn't much cared for Ziggy, to be honest. What disturbed me was that a vampire was murdered. It just happened to be him. My personal dangers had escalated. The conspiracy behind the outbreak of nymphomania remained guarded by trigger-happy federal maniacs. Someone had tried to steal my computer and conked me on the head, and I'm sure that same guy had used me for target practice. Was he one of the vampire hunters prowling the streets of Denver? My fingertips tingled. My vampire senses grasped a hunch and alerted me that perhaps, no, certainly, these events were connected. If so, then time to re-energize my investigation and draw out those stalking me. My leads pointed to one man, the person at the center of the conspiracy behind the outbreak. Dr. Bigelow Wong. I'd kept my distance, fearing that I would compromise my investigation if I pressed him too eagerly. My adversaries, whoever they were, weren't worried by such concerns. From my internet source, I learned that Dr. Wong had managed his dollars well during his career with the Department of Energy. He had recently bought a home in Tucson, Arizona, and moved his family there. While he waited for retirement, he lived alone in a high-rise condominium in the Park Hill neighborhood of Denver. The condo building was new, accented with rounded corners and oval windows that repeated the architectural rhythm of the gently arched roof. Each story had recessed balconies and stuccoed walls, the floors alternating in pastel green and beige, and separated by narrow ledges that looked like icing squeezed between the layers of a cake. Entrance to the building was through a small, unadorned lobby. Banks of mailboxes and an intercom occupied the wall to the left. An elevator stood on the other side of a partition of green-tinted glass. Access to the elevator was through a glass door, which was locked. I couldn't very well ring Dr. Wong on the intercom and ask to be let in to discuss the outbreak. Sifting through a trash can under the mailboxes, I pulled out a piece of discarded junk mail. Standing against the glass partition, I pretended to read the mail and waited for someone to unlock the door. The elevator chimed. Out stepped a young, stylish couple. They chatted about dinner plans with friends and exited, ignoring my presence. I caught the door before it closed and went to the elevator, which I took to the third floor. Once there, I found Dr. Wong's unit, number 313. I removed my contacts, slipped on leather gloves, and knocked on the door. Someone called out in a bothered voice. What is it? Mr. Wong, this is maintenance. It's Dr. Wong. It's late. Why are you bothering me? Excuse me, Dr. Wong. Someone reported a gas leak, and we're trying to track it down. There's no gas leak here. I wish I could take your word, but we need to play it safe. The lock snapped, and the door opened. Very well, he groused. Dr. Wong turned away before we made eye contact. You can be sure that the manager will hear about this tomorrow. I'm not paying those outrageous association fees to be bothered like this. His red aura bristled with spikes and signaled his annoyance. Spindly brown arms and legs jutted from his yellow t-shirt and baggy shorts. Come in. Make it quick. I entered and shut the door. The living room opened to a kitchen. A cool breeze from the balcony swept through a sliding door and rustled the newspaper on the kitchen counter. I put my hand on Wong's shoulder. He spun around to parry my arm. My grip held him firm. His eyes drew wide and his scowl went flat when I locked my vampire gaze upon him. I pushed him backwards onto a sofa seat. I let go of his shoulder. Holding his hands, I kneaded the webs of flesh between his thumbs and index fingers. Dr. Wong's breathing eased. His muscles relaxed. His aura softened. I kept my gaze locked on his until his aura swirled around his body like warm syrup. Dr. Wong, tell me about Project Red Light. Though his face remained expressionless, he replied with a chuckle. Red light? That's been my ticket to financial independence. Under hypnosis, victims' answers were shaded by their subconscious biases. I had to guide the interrogation to get the facts I needed. Your success? In what? His chuckle resumed. In DOE. What I know makes me very important and dangerous. Dangerous to whom? He pointed his nose to the ceiling. The bigwigs, the men who run this country, the guardians of the truth. What truth? The world did go crazy, he giggled. I, Dr. Bigelow Wong, the nerdy, anal-retentive scientist, suddenly had to fight off the pussy. All those beautiful women who ignored me for so many years couldn't drop their panties fast enough. Who would have expected? It was better than any retention bonus. For a few beautiful days, I was the big Wong. Yes, I know about the nymphomania, but what was the cause? His aura spiked again. Warning. His hands suddenly pulled loose from mine, and he seized my wrists. I immediately yanked free and grabbed his shoulders. To subdue him, I had to use my fangs. I aimed for his throat. Perhaps screwing the Nymphos had contaminated him, and this was how he resisted my hypnosis. But his aura remained steady and hadn't changed to yellow, as had the infected radiological control technicians. He acted cooperative. My fangs retracted. I caressed his eyes shut and cradled his face in my hands. As my aura melded with his, siphoning his psychic resistance and strengthening my hypnotic hold, his muscles relaxed. His pulse slowed. I asked again, what was the cause? Red light, he whispered. Sh-209. What? Sh-209, red mercury. What about red mercury? Wong started to raise an arm. I let him, and he motioned to a shelf of books on the opposite wall. The cause was red mercury and the EBEs. EBEs. My diary explains everything. DOE forbade any mention of classified information except in authorized documents. You keep a diary? He wet his lips. Yes. Why? He tilted his head back toward the ceiling and replied in a quiet, smug tone. Consider it blackmail against the gods. Carefully withdrawing my hands, I turned and followed the direction of his upraised arm. I didn't expect to find a book labeled Dr. Wong's Secret Diary. Where is it? Inside the copy of Audubon's Birds of America. I found the volume. Tucked into a cutout within the color plates was a slim composition book. I opened the composition book and found it filled with neat columns of handwritten notes. It was a diary. Could unraveling the conspiracy be this easy? I maneuvered an ottoman in front of the doctor and sat. I would peruse the notes and ask Wong to explain everything. At last, I'd find out about the Tiger Team report, Project Red Light, his trips to Area 51, the Red Mercury, and now the EBEs. By this time tomorrow, I'd be at Rocky Flats, giving Gilbert Oden my report and collecting the remainder of my fee. Case closed. I heard a thwack. Dr. Wong? He remained silent. His red aura faded, collapsing into his slumped form. I shook him. Dr. Wong! Dr. Wong! He tipped forward. Blood seeped across the back of his t-shirt. Wong's aura faded to nothing. He was dead. A tuft of stuffing curled from a hole in the upholstery. Something had punched through the back of the seat. A bullet? I snapped a look over his shoulder, past the kitchen, and to another tall building beyond his balcony. My ears and fingertips tingled from my vampire senses going to maximum alert. I ducked. A bullet whizzed past. The lamp on the end table shattered. With the diary tucked to my side, I scrambled for the front door and out into the hall. The elevator chimed. Much too coincidental an arrival. I spied an exit sign in the other direction and sprinted. The elevator doors whooshed open. I turned my head for an instant to see who came out. Two men, bearded and middle-aged, burst into the hall. They wore hats and long, open coats. Red auras flared around them. Large silver crucifixes hung from their necks. One brandished a sawed-off shotgun, and the other a double-bladed axe, the type of weapons used to murder Ziggy. The men yelled at each other in a harsh foreign dialect. Vanatory de vampire. I kicked open the metal fire door leading to the stairwell. Just as I cleared the threshold, a blast of pellets ricocheted off the door. I used my vampire powers to glide above the steps to the next landing. The man with the shotgun leaned over the railing and took aim. I huddled against the wall, outside his line of sight. A volley of pellets splattered along the stairs. Pain stabbed my left leg. One pellet tore into my shin. I limped down the stairs, suddenly too weak to float over more than a few steps at a time. I continued to the bottom of the stairwell and went out the door, into the crisp, Night air of the alley. A row of sodium lamps threw their yellow glare into the gloom. I ran to the left, the shortest path to my car. In front of me, where the alley emptied to the street, appeared a man with a coat similar to my pursuer's. His aura burned with hatred. He cradled a hunting rifle with a scope. I was sure he was the one who had shot Dr. Wong. He jerked the rifle to his shoulder and fired a wild shot that missed. The stairwell door behind me opened with a bang, and the two men rushed into the alley. I was trapped. I halted. The silver pellet burned against my left shin bone. Blood oozed into my shoe. My throat tightened in panic. My ears and fingers tingled so hard that they buzzed. The only escape was to crawl up the wall. I hobbled over and planted my toes and fingertips against the stucco. Managing only 2 feeble steps against gravity, I knew that I couldn't reach the balcony above in time to avoid getting shot and decapitated. I slid back to the ground. The man with the rifle tracked me through the scope. The other 2 men called to him, and he held his fire. Shadows falling from the wide brims of their hats shrouded their faces. In this meager light, I couldn't easily hypnotize them. Not all at once, and not until they got closer. They approached warily. Their auras crackled with hostility and determination. The older one with the axe held his crucifix before him and chanted in Latin. An approaching police siren echoed through the alley. The man glanced over his shoulder toward the siren and let the crucifix dangle. He gripped his axe with both hands, his fingers flexing. He hissed at his companions, and their steps quickened. With this wounded leg, I couldn't escape, not in human form. A dumpster stood against the wall to my left, midway between the man with the rifle and myself. I ran toward it as best I could. Bolts of agony shot up my left leg. 10 feet from the dumpster, I leapt and dove for the inside. I didn't figure that the cover might be secured. Instead of landing within, I bounced off the metal top. I landed hard on the asphalt between the dumpster and the wall, knocking the wind out of me and scraping my knuckles. Gasping and dizzy, I struggled to my feet, tilted open the dumpster's cover, and crawled inside, to land on top of piles of stinking garbage. I burrowed into the trash, into the slime and yuck at the very bottom, and tucked myself into a ball. I commanded the transformation and channeled pain and fear into the energy needed to change my shape. My heartbeat quickened. My bones and joints stretched and popped, each crack a torture that I endured in silence. My skull distended. Saliva washed from my mouth, dripping from many sharp teeth. Skin prickled as my hair thickened and spread across my body. Smells flooded my growing snout. My ears picked sounds too faint even for vampires. I shook off the man's garments choking me. I waited hunched inside the dumpster, naked and hairy, no longer vampire, but wolf. The man-creatures approached the enclosure, their breathing guarded and anxious. They exuded smells of digested cow meat, perspiration, and the greasy odor of their deadly fire weapons. The hairs on my spine bristled. My lips curled back to bare, vicious canines. I felt the urge to rip their flesh and taste blood. But escape was my priority. Revenge could come later. The long end of a human weapon pushed over the top of the enclosure. Just as the man's head appeared, I lunged for him and knocked aside the weapon. He screamed. The weapon released its explosive bark. The loud noise stung my ears. I landed between him and his companion. My left hind leg collapsed, and I yelped, reminded painfully of my wound. Springing to my paws, I raced down the canyon between the human nesting structures and hid in the shadows. Another weapon barked, and its bite pinged well away to my side. I turned the corner and continued down the wide path. The wail of the siren became louder. Several humans emerged from one of their carriers. The 2 males smelled of a recent dinner, and the female of estrus. I snarled at them. They shouted in fright and jumped away. I was surrounded by mountains of human dwellings. Sniffing river water, I turned toward the source, knowing that I could hide in the reeds and wait until later to transform back into a vampire. A human carrier roared in front of me. Lights flashed along its top. I stumbled and turned. My wounded leg buckled under me. I lunged off my good hind leg and started again. The smell of river water grew stronger. I lifted my head to look for any signs of bushes or a shoreline. I headed west and slinked through the bushes and shadows surrounding the dwellings. Human carriers rolled past. Some slowed and made honking noises. One of the human carriers with the flashing colored lights shined a powerful light in my direction. I hid within a lilac bush along a fence and waited for them to leave. The moon crested the tallest dwelling. I welcomed the opportunity to rest. My wounded hind leg burned with pain. The light went dark, and the carrier left. I trotted from under the bush and continued west. I moved carefully from cover to cover and did my best to avoid humans. There were few of their carriers on the roads. By the time the moon had risen high above, the smell of the river was strong and inviting. I loped from the shadows toward an open dirt lot. Colored lights flashed on. A bright white light caught me. I dashed to the left. A sudden sting, like from a bee, popped me beside my tail. Desperate to escape, I ran faster. My legs grew clumsy. My paws knocked against each other. I slowed and dragged my numbed hind legs. A feathered human weapon clung to my haunches. I tried to gnaw it off, but my head felt too heavy to hold upright. Drowsiness smothered my panic. I lay on the cool ground and watched through dimming eyes a human approach, a rope in her hands. The yapping of excited dogs awakened me. Felix! I lifted my groggy head in the direction my name had come from. Recognizing the scent, then the voice, and finally the orange aura, I struggled upright to my paws. A cone of white material encircled my head. A familiar man stepped close. His hand reached into my cage. I whimpered in anticipation of regaining my freedom and clumsily turned my head with this cone around it. His fingers stroked my muzzle, and I licked them in appreciation. The man fumbled with the front of the cage and opened the door. He spread a blanket on the floor and beckoned me with a soothing whisper. I limped out of the cage and lay in the center of the blanket. Shutting my eyes, I summoned the transformation. Pain enveloped me. I clenched my teeth to keep from yelping. Saliva bubbled through my lips. My legs trembled and my tail twitched from the agony. The dogs in the cages around us whined and barked nervously. Fur retracted into flesh. My skin felt on fire. This cone around my head dug into my neck. My bones twisted and realigned from the shape of a wolf into that of a vampire. The toes on my forelimbs stretched into fingers. My hearing grew dim. The smells in my nose became simple. Abstract thought returned, and my awareness swelled with the names of things inside the dark kennel, especially this plastic doggy cone I found wrapped around my head. I ripped the thing off. The man laughed. "You're lucky I didn't bring a camera." I wiped the drool and sweat from my face. "Screw you." I pulled the blanket over my nakedness. "How the hell did you end up here?" Bob Carcano lifted the blanket away from my left leg. "What happened?" "Shotgun. Vampire hunters." Then a dog catcher nailed me in the ass with a tranquilizer dart. He felt my swollen wound. "They could have done a better job treating you. Mind if I help?" I flinched. "Be my guest." Bob dragged the razor edge of his fingernail over the lump and cut my skin. He squeezed tainted blood through the incision. I clenched my fists to withstand the anguish. Sweat trickled from my brow, pooled in my eye sockets, and stung my eyes. Blood spurted from the slit. The pellet popped out and rattled across the linoleum. "Silver," Bob said. "Must have been agony." "It hurt like hell, if that's what you're getting at." Bob spit on his fingers and massaged my wound. The pain ebbed as his vampire enzymes deadened the nerves and began healing the injured tissues. I lay on the floor and breathed deeply, relieved that I had survived and was back in the form of a vampire. Bob offered his hand. "Let's go." He helped me up. Walking stiffly, I dragged the blanket along and followed Bob to the exit. "How'd you know I was here?" "A wolf gets trapped in Denver. News like that has a way of making it to my ears." He reset the alarm by the door and pocketed the key. "You aren't the first vampire I've rescued from the Denver Municipal Animal Shelter." We went outside and proceeded toward his Buick Regal. The chill caused me to wrap the blanket tight against my naked body. The muffled barking inside the shelter carried into the darkness. Cold gravel in the parking lot poked the tender soles of my bare feet. I leaned on Bob's shoulder to offset my still weakened left leg. "What time is it?" Bob pulled back the cuff of his jacket to read his watch. "A little past 3. Thursday morning?" "Yeah." Bob aimed his remote at the Buick. Its lights flashed and the honk chirped twice. He opened the rear door for me. The interior dome light blinked on. "Don't take this wrong, Felix, but you stink like a sewer." "That's a relief. I thought you were going to say I smelled like I had spent the night in a kennel." There's a grocery bag with some clothes, he said. I found old trousers and a frayed sweatshirt. I shrugged off the blanket and put the clothes on. Bob's gaze lingered on me. You're in good shape, Felix, even if there is shrinkage of the important parts. Blame that on the cold. It's been a while since I've had a nice-looking naked man in my car. I thought you were celibate. I'd make an exception for you. He squeezed behind the steering wheel. Vampire to vampire. What you don't know, I'll teach. Think I'll pass. I pulled the door closed. The dome light went off. Thanks, though. Bob handed a large plastic 7-Eleven cup over his shoulder. It's half cappuccino yogurt shake and half goat's blood. Should perk you right up. We left the parking lot. I sipped the shake, its rich coolness refreshing me. Coffee and goat's blood go so well together. Make sure you stay on that blanket, he cautioned. I don't want your funk stinking up the upholstery. Where are we going? Isn't it obvious? Take a whiff of yourself. The closest shower or bath. I ought to dip you for fleas. Take me to Wong's place first. I related what had happened at the condo. Vanatori? Bob's aura throbbed in concern. Could you recognize them? By their auras, but not by their faces. It's kind of hard to loiter when someone's drawing a bead on you with a shotgun. And you ran down the stairs, he asked. Why not up to the roof and then crawl down the outside wall? They'd never be able to follow you. I paused, too embarrassed to answer right away. I've been having problems clinging. Bob slapped the steering wheel. God damn it, Felix. I told you that not drinking human blood would weaken your vampire powers. And Ziggy? He was never more than 5 minutes away from a human neck, and the vampire hunters still got him. Ziggy's arrogance did him in. Bob's voice sharpened. As for you, clinging against gravity is the first power to go. Then your sixth sense falters. After that, take the next right at Broadway, I interrupted. Aren't you listening? Stow it, Bob. I'll deal with this on my own terms. On your own terms, all right, until your head is cut off and your fangs carried away as a trophy by those fanatics. No one knows the risks better than I. The silence in the car became thick with antagonism. I liked Bob, respected him, but he knew better than to broach the subject of my not consuming human blood. We said nothing until I gave him directions to the condo. We turned off Broadway and continued on side streets. A police van, a cruiser, and 2 government sedans were parked in front of Wong's building. A police officer stood guard at the lobby door. I'm not surprised to see the cops here, Bob said. Didn't think that someone blasting a shotgun in the halls would go unnoticed. Sure you want to stop? I need to get my things from the dumpster. We turned the corner toward the alley. A police cruiser was parked between the dumpster and the rear door of the building. The car's hazard lights flashed. Shit, I said. Keep going past the alley and park down the block. Bob slowed and halted alongside the curb. What's so damn important that you can't replace? For one thing, cops find my ID and they'll know I was here. I cracked the door open and got out. Plus, I hid Dr. Wong's diary in the bottom of the dumpster. This diary has sensitive information. According to Wong, it explains everything. We rounded the corner and headed up the alley. A perimeter of yellow tape surrounded the dumpster. I walked lightly, the rough asphalt and litter pricking the bottoms of my feet. In these thrift store cast-offs, I felt like the lowliest of bums. A cop sat in the cruiser. The dim blue glow of a cell phone splashed alongside his face. He whispered romantic palaver. Yeah, babe, she doesn't mean anything to me. Not like you. Let me do the talking, Bob said. I'll bet he doesn't understand Romanian, and that will buy us time. The cop glanced up and snapped his cell phone closed. He jerked open his door, climbing out. You're going to have to leave, he commanded gruffly. The gloom hid our eyes, allowing us to get closer. The cop came around the rear of his cruiser. You two deaf? I said leave, now. Bob started talking Romanian and gesticulated over his shoulder. We kept approaching the cop. He put his right hand over the grip of his pistol. I don't understand a word you're saying, but stop right there. He looked at my bare feet, my rumpled clothes, and then back at Bob. With his left hand, the cop clasped the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder. I sprang forward and gripped the cop's head. His left arm twisted out to parry me, but too late. My gaze locked onto his eyes. He froze. Bob pulled the cop away from me and sank his fangs into the cop's neck. The cop gurgled and went limp. Bob knelt beside him, sucking on his neck. Bob stood, wiping his mouth. Pure beefcake, this one. Definitely filet mignon. The cop lay sprawled on the asphalt, twitching. Can't leave him like that, I said. Someone finds him. They'll go ape shit. You're right. Better put him back in the car. We carried the cop to the cruiser. The back door of the building opened. A uniformed female cop and a man in a suit with a badge hanging from his neck stepped out. What the hell? He muttered. Bob and I dropped the cop and he plopped to the asphalt. The female cop sprang into the alley, her pistol leveled at us. Don't move. I stank like compost, and an unconscious police officer lay at my bare, dirty feet. What could I say? The plainclothes cop drew a snub-nosed revolver from inside his sport coat. Bob raised his arms. We found him knocked out, just like this. The cop's forehead wrinkled. The spikes of his aura blunted as his mood changed from anger to confusion. Why would two men, meaning us, be carrying a uniformed cop? Maybe we were telling the truth. Bob pointed to the ground. He was right there. We were going to put him in the squad car and then get help. The female cop's aura remained as prickly as a thistle. She kept her big semi-automatic trained on us. On your knees. Put your hands on your heads. I turned my back to the lamp on the opposite alley wall and let the early morning darkness conceal my tapetum lucidum, and Bob did the same. We knelt and carefully set our hands on our scalps. Our one chance to escape was to get the cops close enough to subdue them with vampire hypnosis. The cop in the suit circled past us for the cruiser. Keep 'em covered. Call for backup. Damn. Backup. The situation was complicated enough without more cops on the scene. The cop stopped in mid-stride. What the? He squinted at me. What the hell is with his eyes? I've never seen eyes shine like that. Bob motioned to me with his elbow. Yes, he's got a medical condition. He blacks out and wanders the streets. That's why he looks like this. The cop stepped close, then grimaced. Oh yeah, and that explains the smell. You should get a whiff of him after he's been out a couple of days. He smells like a rose now in comparison. I knocked Bob's elbow with my own to let him know that I didn't appreciate being the butt of his snarky jokes. The female cop set her flashlight parallel to her pistol. Let me see. I closed my eyes and turned my head. Open your eyes, she said. Come on, it's for your own good. You might need medical attention. The flashlight beam shone through my eyelids as a red haze. Bob nudged my arm. Go ahead, open your eyes now. I did. Both cops stood close and leaned into one another. Their heads almost touched. Their two pistols remained pointed at my face. Their eyes popped wide open, as at such close range, my tapetum lucidum bore into them like lasers. The female cop's jaw slackened. The male cop lowered his arm. His revolver clattered to the ground. Bob yanked the male cop's necktie and jerked him down. Bob clasped the cop's head and tilted it back to expose the neck. I kept my gaze on the female cop and unbuttoned her shirt midway, then spread her collar to examine her neck. I traced my fangs across the inviting contours of her throat. Her warm blood beckoned me. I sank my fangs into her fat, welcoming jugular. Her blood filled my mouth. I dammed the flow with my tongue and proceeded to work my saliva into her wounds. She relaxed. Her aura became muted. I took the pistol and flashlight from her hands and returned them to her belt. Bob smacked his lips. My cop had a note of Johnny Walker in his blood. Black label. Somebody's got problems with the bottle. This isn't a tasting party. I motioned to the dumpster. Let's get that diary and beat feet before more cops come along. Bob dragged his cop to the cruiser. You go dumpster diving while I take care of these three. I rested the female cop against the front tire of the cruiser. I pushed aside the yellow police tape, climbed into the dumpster, and searched through leaking bags of garbage. Damp coffee grounds clung to my hands. Slimy, rotting vegetables lapped my wrists. I found my trousers and jacket and examined the pockets. My wallet, keys, cell phone, and scout knife were still there. I kept digging to the bottom of the dumpster until I discovered Dr. Wong's diary. Garbage water dripped from the soaked pages as I climbed out of the dumpster. Bob had arranged the three cops in the rear seat of the cruiser, the female in the middle. They slumped, shoulder to shoulder, their heads resting on the back of the seat. Bob stroked his chin as he studied them. They looked bored. He got back in the car and unzipped the male cop's pants, then shoved the female's hands into each of her companion's crotches. As a finishing touch, he opened her shirt to the navel and pulled her bra down. Bob shut the door, locking them in. What do you think? Nice rack on her. I'd love to hear them try to explain this. Vampires hypnotized us, Bob whined satirically, made us play with each other and locked us inside. We walked out of the alley and back toward his Buick. Don't take this wrong, Bob said, but you stink even worse than before. I don't care what I smell like as long as I have this. I showed him the diary. Bob examined it. Sections of wet pages disintegrated at his touch. Hey, careful. I took the diary back and smoothed the pages to see if the writing remained legible. We reached his car and climbed in. What's that diary prove? Bob asked. He started the Buick and drove away from the curb. That Wong knew what had caused the nymphomania and that he helped cover it up. What caused it? He said red mercury and EBEs. Which are? Red mercury, I assume, is a material used at Rocky Flats for making nuclear weapons. I've never heard of it before. And EBEs? I'm going to let Gilbert Odin explain that. Bob's aura flashed. He tapped the brakes. The car lurched. What's to explain? The investigation's over. Give your friend the diary, collect your fee, and disappear. Case closed. I've got to tell him about the people who killed Dr. Wong. Bob resumed normal speed. Are you crazy? You're going to tell your friend, a federal employee, that vampire hunters are on your trail? Of course not. But they did murder Wong, so why not let the police catch them? And if they capture the Vanatori, think the police will believe their story that they killed Dr. Wong by mistake when they were aiming for a vampire. So what the hell were we doing back there, ditching those cops? I thought you wanted to stay clear of that. I needed to get the diary first. Let me tell Gilbert about the murder when I see him. I caressed the damp cover of the diary. Instead of drawing assurances that my investigation into the nymphomania was definitely closed, I felt a twinge of doubt. My fingertips tingled to alert me of danger. But of what? And from whom? I'm not so sure this investigation is over, I added. There's more to the conspiracy than what's in this diary. Bob pulled the Buick to the curb and jammed the transmission into park. He turned to me. His tapetum lucidum glowed hot in the reflection of the street lamps. And so what? That book explains the outbreak, and that's all that you were hired to do. Our priority now is the Vanatori. I'll inform the Araneum and call for a council of the Nidus. You'll testify about what you know. Not yet, Bob. Your investigation is over. Sorry, this investigation is far from over. I held quivering fingertips before him. I can feel it. You and I, all the vampires in Denver, are in greater danger than ever because of this. Something's been set in motion, and the more we try to ignore it, the worse it will get for everyone. Like the last time when I'd seen him in his office, Gilbert Odin put his telephone inside the credenza behind him, along with a boombox playing heavy metal turned up full volume. He closed the credenza door, muffling the screaming of guitars and the hammering of drums. Gilbert folded his hands on his desk and gave me a genial smile. It's safe to talk now. Couldn't there be any more bugs in that, for example? I pointed to the lamp on his desk. Oh no, I know exactly what listening devices security has. I'm on their budget approval committee. A 7 Sigma telephone eavesdropping microphone is all they're authorized to use on me. I suppose the logic made sense to a professional bureaucrat, but it gave me a headache. I pinched the bridge of my nose to ease the pressure. How's the investigation going, Felix? The investigation. That word alone worsened the headache. When I handed Wong's diary over to Gilbert, I wanted him to kiss me in gratitude, then write a check and send me on my way. Well, Gilbert, for starters, Dr. Wong is dead. We all know that. Gilbert tapped the newspaper on his desk. Page 1 of the Metro section showed a picture of the doctor under the headline, Rocky Flats Nuclear Scientist Murdered. Gilbert added, the police say it was a botched robbery. The cabbage smell swirled from him, not as strong as before, but enough to make me think he needed to vary his diet. It was no robbery, I said. I know who killed him. Who? Terrorists? No, enemies of mine. Gilbert held a hand up. Whoa, back up. What enemies? I couldn't tell him the truth, that they were vampire hunters. Enemies with a vendetta from a previous assignment. Wong got shot by mistake. A vendetta? Gilbert asked. The mafia's after you? No, I answered. I have enough enemies, thank you. Enemies savvy enough to ambush me. I had the mysterious gunman and the Vanatori after me, a lethal double threat. Suddenly, I realized that Wong had been shot only moments after I arrived at his condo. How did the vampire hunter marksman set up his rifle so soon, unless he had the place staked out, which meant he and his companions knew I was going to see Dr. Wong, but only I knew about the visit. A chill ran up my spine and out to my hands. My fingertips tingled as my vampire senses went on alert. Hey, hey, Gilbert snapped his fingers. You okay? I rubbed my hands together to calm the tingling. I wished I didn't have to hide my eyes behind contacts. I needed the reassuring ability to read auras, even my friend Gilbert's. I'm all right, I answered. I thought you were having a seizure. He gestured to my face. Something related to that Gulf War syndrome of yours. I appreciate the concern. The question now is, what should I tell the investigators? About what? What I know about Wong's murder. Let the police worry about it. You said it wasn't terrorists, so there's no threat to Rocky Flats. Only a threat to me, I replied. And you can't handle it? His question was a dare. You said that it was enemies from a previous case. Should I be concerned? No, it's my problem. I didn't want the cops to find the Vanatori until after the nidus had torn the vampire hunters to pieces. You don't want anyone to know that I've been talking to Dr. Wong, correct? Gilbert nodded. That's right. Keep this between you and me. You're saying this investigation into the nymphomania is more important than Wong's murder? Gilbert focused his gaze into my eyes. Yes, even more important than Wong's murder. Or mine, for that matter. What kind of a conspiracy was this? Why? Gilbert shook his head. Because if you go blabbing that you were with Dr. Wong when he got killed, then you're likely to be locked up as a person of interest and forgotten. The wall of security around the conspiracy will only grow more formidable, and I'll be SOL forever. People with guns had already tried to stop me, so I appreciated Gilbert's well-grounded concerns. I pulled out a Ziploc bag containing Wong's diary. The doctor didn't have the chance to tell me much. He did mention. I paused to gauge Gilbert's reaction. Red mercury. Gilbert narrowed his eyes. Red mercury? I laid the Ziploc bag on his desk. It's all right here. Doctor, Wong kept a diary. Gilbert's face reddened. A diary? With classified information? According to him. Gilbert sighed. What the hell did he do that for? Wong was convinced that safeguarding the secrets behind the outbreak would serve as insurance. For what? His safety. Bullshit. This was about Dr. Wong and his inflated opinion of his own work. Gilbert used a mechanical pencil to slide the diary out of the bag and flip it open. The damp, filthy pages clumped together and exuded a disgusting smell. Gilbert stifled a gag reflex. Where did this come from? A toilet? I hid in a dumpster to escape. I suppose that is better than a toilet. Gilbert adjusted his spectacles as he studied Wong's notes. Red mercury, huh? Anything else? EBEs, Gilbert shrugged. Got me there. I've never heard of that. I homed in on Gilbert's expression as I asked, Project Red Light? Gilbert rocked back into his seat. Sorry, Felix, I'm drawing a blank on that one. His expression matched the flat tone of his statement. Area 51? I asked. Nevada? Gilbert set his hands on the armrests of his chair and sat up straight. That I can answer. Here at the flats, we generated waste streams of classified material. Dr. Wong was our liaison with the U.S. Air Force in Area 51 to make sure that we didn't inadvertently release sensitive information about these materials during our cleanup. Secret? Yes. Mysterious? No. I tapped the inside cover of the diary. Look, it gives the dates. From 2 years ago to last week. Wong started making entries long before the outbreak. Carefully, I turned to the middle of the diary. The damp pages tore. The writing smudged, but you can make out his comment about 23 kilograms of Hg209, red mercury, moved from Building 707. That's the curious thing. There's no mention of red mercury in the historical discharge reports. Of course not. The only mercury we've used was quicksilver in instruments, and perhaps some mercuric oxide in minuscule amounts for laboratory analysis. That's all. That's what I'm getting at. Existence of the red mercury was so secret that it was even kept out of the classified safety analysis files. Gilbert shook his head the way a professor might at a confused student. Red mercury is a sham. Supposedly the Russians used it as a catalyst for fusion weapons. It is mildly radioactive and very toxic and useless. Quantities pop up on the European black market every now and then. Some sucker pays a few $1,000 for crap he thinks is weapons-grade material. So why did Wong mention red mercury? Maybe our good doctor wasn't so good. Maybe he had something cooking on the side. But 23 kilograms, that's more than a minuscule amount. True, it's quite a lot, and if he had any, it wasn't produced here. But he mentioned it specifically when I asked him about the outbreak. That and the EBEs. Let me tell you something about Dr. Wong. He was a fossil, a relic of the Cold War. When DOE consolidated its weapons operations in Los Alamos, Wong was left here, out to pasture. I'm sure he was upset because of his treatment by DOE. Maybe that's why he concocted this chimera about red mercury and EBEs, whatever those are. I pushed the diary toward Gilbert. The damp pages left a slimy trail on his desk blotter. You asked me to find the cause of the nymphomania. Here it is. Gilbert got up from behind his desk and opened the blinds of his window. 100 meters away, on the barren ground inside the concertina wire of the protected area, waited a long white semi-trailer. A tent covered the rear of the trailer. Security guards in camouflage and carrying submachine guns patrolled the vicinity. Dr. Wong's death spooked a lot of important people, Gilbert said. I spent my breakfast hour on a conference call with Germantown and D.C. Because of what happened to Wong, the shipment of the material I'm concerned about has been accelerated. Gilbert wrapped the window for emphasis. The material will be loaded into that trailer, which will leave for the WIP facility in New Mexico within days, not weeks. You have Wong's diary. It's enough for you to demand to personally inspect the trailer. Gilbert pulled a folder from his inbox. That ain't how it works. Gilbert opened the folder and produced a sheaf of forms. As the assistant manager for environmental restoration, my signature verifies the accuracy of these shipping documents for the trailer. If I don't sign them, I'd better have an excellent reason. It's called playing the DOE game. And if you refuse? Gilbert closed the folder. Then I get reassigned. Some political hack will take my place behind this desk, and whatever's in the trailer will get buried deep in Carlsbad caverns. After which, the cause of the outbreak will remain a mystery forever, until the next wave of nymphomania, or worse. Meanwhile, I take water samples in Idaho for the rest of my career. You hired me to find the cause, and I told you. Felix, give me something I can work with, and I'll get a warrant. I'll have a team of federal marshals knocking down that fence and cutting that trailer open. Gilbert slid the folder back into his inbox. But red mercury? Why not magic dust or dilithium crystals while we're at it? Wong yanked your chain real good. The book shriveled under the glare of Gilbert's desk lamp. The pages wrinkled and tore. My ego felt the same way. I was at another dead end. Frustration turned into suspicion. Maybe Gilbert wasn't so clean himself. I tipped my head and reached to remove my contacts so that I could hypnotize him. I stopped. Gilbert had asked me as a friend to help him, so why would he keep secrets from me? I felt guilty for suspecting him and lowered my hand. Felix, the key word in this investigation is deception. The only way I can get at the truth is to call their bluff. Whose bluff? The ones who know what caused the nymphomania. What are they hiding, and why? Gilbert leaned against the window frame and rubbed his temples. I need proof to show that the inventory reports about those shipments are a lie. I know it seems like an impossible task, but that's why I asked for your help. If that trailer leaves Rocky Flats without answering that question, I'll have failed. You'll have failed. Don't let that happen. The anguish of defeat pressed upon me. I loosened my collar. Sweat tickled my brow, but I couldn't wipe it or I'd smear my makeup. This was my job. Sure, I could quit and can the hassle. Then what? Go somewhere else and quit that too? Maybe this failure was the result of the gradual loss of my vampire powers because I wouldn't drink human blood. No, that couldn't be it. I'd prove Bob Carcano wrong. A pulse of determination surged through me. My fangs extended. Gilbert had his back to me, so he didn't notice. I held my lips closed until the sharp incisors retracted, and then I touched the tips to make sure they didn't protrude. Gilbert turned from the window. He glanced at me. You got dental problems? Something like that. If I find out what's in the trailer, that will solve the conspiracy? Yes, that simple? if you call breaking into the protected area and getting shot simple. Consider it done. Gilbert's forehead wrinkled in doubt. How? I don't know yet. Let me surprise you. Bob quit chewing and wiped his mouth. Before you wet your panties, listen. You're tangling with DOE, and vampire hunters have got us on their hit list. Considering that you've got to be looking over both shoulders at the same time, I'm surprised that you're not grateful for our help. You're right, I'm not. I don't need you two stumbling behind me. As if you've been so sure-footed. Didn't you get conked on the head? And do I have to go over the how and why of my rescuing you from the animal shelter? I didn't want to answer. This was my business. My appetite waned, and regretfully, I watched the pig's blood congeal on my tacos. Andre whispered in an accusing tone. And now we have this revelation that you won't drink human blood, deny your nature, and you stand naked before the danger with your eyes closed. I gulped my beer and let it settle in my stomach. Okay, I was a vampire. Maybe I was blinding myself to the risks, and I shouldn't be so headstrong, especially if it put me in the position of being lectured by this geezer. All right, I am grateful for your help. Where would we start? My fingers tingled. I looked around. Somebody's watching us. I feel it too. Bob hunched his shoulders and looked about. All three of us removed our contacts and examined the area. We were alone under the awning. Cars whooshed by on the boulevard. The red auras of humans shimmered in the black dome of night that surrounded us beyond the glow of the parking lot lamps. None of the auras bristled with threatening emotion. The tingling stopped. Whatever it was, it's gone now, Bob said. Not it, I corrected. But who? Venatori de Vampire, Andre asked. Who else could spook us like this? Bob answered. In my centuries as a vampire, I've never seen the Venatori de Vampire, Andre said. Never? I asked. Not one. I spent most of my time fanging humans in the Orient, the eastern provinces, Siam, Java, moved to South America for the 15 through 1700s. Andre sat, his expression tense. How many Venatori are there? 4, I replied. At least, that's how many I've seen. Andre wrung his hands. In this light, withdrawn and circumspect, he appeared frail and weary. He was, after all, close to 1,000 years old. Up until these attacks, Andre said, I regarded the Venatori as Ziggy had, more exaggeration than truth. No human could be capable of stalking and killing us so easily. Bob collected the plastic ware and napkins on his tray. And look what happened to Ziggy. Standing out here like this, I feel like I'm the center target in a shooting gallery. Let's go. We tossed the remnants of our food into the trash. I jingled my keys and hurried to my car. Bob and I climbed into my Dodge. Andre got into his Pontiac. The comforting rumble of the Dodge's engine alleviated my fears. The needle on the tachometer quivered as if daring the Venatori to come after us. I squealed the tires and fishtailed out of the parking lot. Slowing down, I waited for Andre to follow. In the rearview mirror, I saw that Andre's headlights were on, but he hadn't left his parking spot. A set of high beams from another car crowded behind him. My fingers tingled, then vibrated in alarm. Bob turned around and looked out the rear window. His aura burned with rage. He shouted, Andre's in trouble. Yeah, I know. I whipped the Dodge into a U-turn. We looped in front of oncoming traffic and smacked the opposite curb. Cars swerved around us, horns blaring. Bob snarled at them, his fangs extended. I gunned the V8 and shot into the southbound lane. My Kundalini Noir reared up and readied my body to strike. Talons grew from my fingers. Fangs extended to my lower lip. Bob squinted. Those damn high beams are blinding me. In the parking lot, the high beams went dim, and a darkened car with 3 glowing red auras zoomed backwards. The car spun around and retreated into the mass of auras and vehicles at the far intersection. I raced the engine to catch them. Bob beat his hand on the dashboard. Stop! Stop! What's happened to Andre? I veered into the parking lot and skidded to a halt beside the Pontiac. Bob jumped out. The Pontiac's motor still rumbled. Inside, a faint orange glow grew dimmer. Bob switched off the motor. He hung his head and leaned against the door pillar. I got out of my Dodge. Did the Venatori get to him? Bob nodded. My Kundalini Noir remained still, disappointed at having lost the chance to tear flesh. I looked inside the Pontiac. Andre's body lay across the center console, decapitated and with a hole in his chest. Vampire blood flakes were strewn like confetti across the instrument panel and the inside of the windshield. The door of the taqueria opened, and a woman, round as a bell pepper, stood silhouetted in the threshold. "Hey," she called out in a barrio accent, "you guys making trouble?" Bob's fangs retracted. Shielding his eyes, he shook his head. "We're okay. My friend's having trouble with his car." "Well, it sounded like someone was starting shit," she said. "Don't make me call the cops." Bob waved at her. "No trouble. Everything's fine." "Then why are you and your friends driving through the lot like it's a goddamn racetrack? I expect Colos to act that way, not a bunch of viejos like you cabrones. If you're done eating here, go somewhere else and do your chingaderas." The woman closed the door and peered at us through the takeout window. Bob opened the car door. Andre's head rested between his knees, upside down. The raw stump of his neck stared at us. "What about his fangs?" I asked. "Gone." The deeper I dig, the more twisted this whole thing gets. Dr. Wong's diary didn't give me the answers I was hoping for. It just opened a door to even more questions. Between the Venatori de Vampire hunting us down and whatever is hidden in that trailer at Rocky Flats, things are spiraling fast. I can feel it. Time's running out, and the danger is closing in. This isn't just about staying alive anymore. It's about uncovering a truth that could change